Hello everyone, welcome. We are going to be talking about finding a school for your child with a special educational need. My name's Lucinda, I'm from the Good Schools Guide. We have a stand just outside the theatre here where we can answer any questions that you might have. We have a specialist SEN department. We review special schools and mainstream schools and write up those reviews for publication on our website and in our books. And we have a team of consultants who can support you and your family's journey in terms of finding a school. One of our consultants is joining us here today, so do come and chat to us afterwards if you've got any questions. I am joined by Tanya Moran, who is the head teacher of Abingdon House School and College. She'll talk to you a little bit about the school in a minute. And also Charlotte Phillips, who is our lead SEN consultant at the Good Schools Guide and has a huge amount of experience supporting families with finding a school for their child. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves a little bit, allow Tanya to tell you a little bit about her school, and we'll launch into some questions. Tanya.
Would you like me to start? Oh, am I on? Yep. Good afternoon, everybody. As Lucinda said, I'm Tanya Moran, and I'm the head teacher of Abingdon House School and College. And Abingdon House School and College caters for students aged 5 to 19. We have now 2 campuses. We have a prep school in South Kensington, and we have a senior school in Marylebone, and in September we are opening a through school in Purley. And we cater for quite a wide range of needs at Abingdon House. We are a mainstream style specialist school. And what do we mean by that? We very much have purposely sat ourselves in this position where we were seeing students time and time again who were coming from really supportive mainstream schools, had made excellent progress, but needed something a little bit more. And they were kind of the children that we often talked about that education forgot. If they needed a much more complex needs school, there was lots of choice out there. If they were able to thrive within a mainstream setting, there was also lots of choice. But for children who really required high aspirations and expectations, having all the doors open, but to be taught in an environment and in a specialist way, there was not a lot of choice, and those children were falling through the gaps. So Abingdon House School runs like any other mainstream school. We have all our different lessons in a day. Students will change classrooms, have different specialist teachers, subject specialists. They'll be studying towards qualifications. We do our sports, our dramas, our trips, just like you would see anywhere else, but everything happens on a smaller scale and with specialist input. So we have class sizes based on 10 with specialist teachers and TAs in every class, and we have an integrated therapy where we have occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, and physiotherapists as full-time members of our staff, and we integrate that therapeutic provision into the academics as well. So everybody is following on the same system. We cater for, as I said, a wide variety of needs because our focus is on the barriers to learning, and it's about supporting and tackling those barriers to learning and ensuring that the students are able to gain the skills and expertise required to keep the doors wide open for them and really thrive and have meaningful outcomes and next steps. So our students will have, like I said, a range of diagnoses: autism, ADHD, specific learning difficulty, general anxiety disorders, and other associated needs. We follow the national curriculum, as I said, and we also have quite a range of qualifications at Key Stage 4 so that students can gain those qualifications to have the next steps beyond us. A little bit of a history. Did I give a bit of a history of the school? We've been, Abingdon House has been around since 2005. In 2016, we joined Cavendish Education, and Cavendish Education is an education group that is very much focused on schools supporting students with special educational needs. While we all run autonomously, and there's 12 schools in the group across the country and 19 different campuses, we all run autonomously, but we have the real benefit of working very, very closely together to be able to share good practice and expertise across the group. Have I missed anything else? There was a list. I'm sorry, I didn't memorize it.
So how does a parent go about getting a place in your school?
Okay. So our application process is very similar to a number of other schools within our group. So when parents think that their child might benefit from coming to a specialist school, they would start by making an inquiry to the school and speaking to our admissions register, who could give some information. We then ask that any paperwork that you may have about your child is submitted to the school. That if they have an education, health, and care plan, it's not a requirement, but if they have that, we absolutely need to see that. Ed psych reports, any other therapeutic reports, and past school reports as well. The admissions team, which is a multidisciplinary team of educationalists and therapists, we will review the paperwork, and if we think in theory we can meet your child's needs, they would then be able to come in and be invited in for a 1 to 2 day trial depending on their age. This is very much a two-way process. It's so the child gets an opportunity to come in, they join a class that we think would be appropriate for them for the day, and they just follow along with that class. We don't do entrance exams. We might sometimes have a therapist or the SENCO do a little bit of outside work with them during one of the lessons if there's some information we feel we need to know more about. But really, we want to see how they manage within the school environment and whether our environment is an area that they can thrive. They would be observed throughout the day by the specialist teachers, therapists, SENCOs. And if at the end of that trial we believe that we can meet needs, we can put an offer out. Like we said, it is not required that your child has an education, health, and care plan, but to be honest, with those diagnoses that I listed, most students would have an education, health, and care plan, although people can pay to come privately as well. And I would say at this stage, 92% of our students have education, health, and care plans and are fully funded by the local authority to attend the school. We have 22 different local authorities that feed to us. So we have close relationships with pretty much every local authority across London. And now that we have been able to spread out a bit, particularly with the opening of the school in Croydon, in Purley in September 2023, we're able to kind of offer more provision for more students.
Fantastic. And then finally, in terms of where your students go on to after they leave you, can you take us through a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So this is a very individualized process, and that is very much what should underpin every component of supporting children with special educational needs. That's our whole reason for being. We're not putting children into a box and say, this is what life looks like. It's very much about working with that individual child, supporting the areas that they're struggling with, and absolutely nurturing their areas of strength and keeping the doors open. So there's not a one-size-fits-all model. We will have students who, particularly when they come to us in the prep school and in the younger years, and can really benefit from that early intervention approach. We have a large number of children who return to mainstream. Other students will stay with us, and they might transition when they go to Key Stage 4 to another specialist provider, or indeed back into mainstream, where there is a wider scope of qualifications. As I said, at Abingdon, we do offer GCSEs and BTECs at both level 1 and level 2 with the BTEC, so that we're leaving the doors wide open. But a number of students are ready at that stage to engage in a full-blown GCSE program. Could go on to one of our other schools, such as Burlington House School, but also, like I said, other specialist schools in mainstream. If students stay with us through our qualification route into the end of Key Stage 4, a large number of them will then go off to further education colleges across London. And the nice thing is, once you're through the Key Stage 4 process and students get to study their subjects and their areas of interest, this is a real benefit to a number of our students. They're not being forced through to have to do all of the subjects. They can now really focus on their areas of interest, which really opens up the world of further education and college past us. We also do run a college provision, so a number of our students will also remain with us for college. Our college provision is very much focused on life skills and directly into the world of work, but we also then have students who transition onto Burlington House's sixth form, which is also preparing for further education in university. So it's not one answer. It's very much about leaving the doors open and ensuring that the child is getting the right provision for them at their stage of development.
Brilliant, thank you. It sounds like an incredibly nurturing and supportive environment. So for parents who have a child with a diagnosis, the number of options available to them is pretty wide and hard to navigate. So Charlotte, what are the options available to parents with a child with special educational needs? If you could take us through, because we need to answer the question, what is the right environment for my child? But first of all, take us through the options as to what is available.
Well, it does absolutely depend on the child. It's such an individual thing. But broadly speaking, for many parents, starting off with a child who's just beginning school, if you have a nurturing primary school, and that could be state or it could be independent, which is completely mainstream, it can be a really happy start to a child's educational life because it's small, you're part of a community, everybody knows who you are, and that can really work out extremely well. It's very often when you get towards senior school that if a child has been experiencing difficulties, which seem to be more than just blips, because many children, if they've got an unsettled time in their lives, will perhaps show signs of unhappiness or distress, but usually those tend to disappear. It's when they don't, and you think, well, perhaps there is something that's not quite right here. Perhaps I do need help, and you start to evaluate what's on offer at secondary school age, that you start to wonder what those choices might be. Yes, you can have mainstream secondary schools, and again, those can be state or, of course, independent. Parents at this point will very often say that what they would like is a mainstream independent school because you have small class sizes, and what I think comes with that is the assumption that there will also be lots of support. It's absolutely true that there are very many independent mainstream schools which are incredibly nurturing and have wonderful care and wonderful pastoral support and wonderful well-being. The only thing here is that they tend not to have huge SEN teams. You can quite often get SEN teams where the team members also have teaching responsibilities and thus don't have that much time to devote to children who need a substantial amount of input. And yes, the class sizes are small, but very often, we are talking obviously about London here to a large extent, the academic pressure is really quite intense. Absolutely amazing for a lot of children who are neurotypical, who love that challenge, love those expectations, thrive in that pressure. Not so good perhaps for children who might be anxious, might find it difficult, might be perfectionists, and for whom that environment, despite those wonderful small class sizes, are not going to settle there. And that's perhaps when it's time to start thinking about different options and ideally evaluating those before you leave that primary or junior school or prep school, say years 4 or 5, and looking perhaps, Tanya has done a very eloquent job of talking about what a more specialist environment can provide, and it's absolutely that. It's finding that balance between academic challenge and support so that your child can flourish and make progress, because, and it's a truism, a happy child is going to make progress. They are going to want to learn. If you get a child into the wrong environment, however able they are, and you can have a child with, say, high-functioning autism who is anxious, put them in a highly pressurised environment, and they may very well simply crumble under the pressure. So it feels a bit like, and it is really difficult, you can feel as though you're embarking on a slightly different path from everybody else you know, and that is never easy. And I speak as a parent of 3 children, 2 of whom are proudly neurodiverse. It's not always easy. It can feel as though you're in a unique universe, but actually you're not. There are many children who do need support, do need something different. It's just a question of working out, okay, that looks great, but is that what my child is actually going to benefit from? Should I be thinking about something different? That's quite a long answer to that question. And also, I didn't introduce myself, so let me do that briefly. I work at the Good Schools Guide, started off as a writer and reviewer. Everybody on our stand outside also write school reviews. So we go in, we talk to head teachers, but I also work as an SEN consultant, and that's simply because that's where my interests lie. And from my own personal experience, it's a very absorbing thing to be involved in.
Thank you. So you've touched there a little bit on highly academic environments. We are talking about London schools here. And you mentioned that you could have an incredibly highly academic child with special educational needs. How does the parent know whether that child is perhaps going to thrive in the mainstream environment or would need to look elsewhere? And at what point should you step in? Because if you've got the child into a mainstream environment, into a great school, whatever the support is at that school, what advice do you have for parents there in terms of watching out for issues?
I think there's a whole range of things to look out for. And as I said before, it's very easy to pathologise a child. Many of the things that children experience are fleeting and temporary and will go away. But if you have, for example, a child who really struggles with the expectations, who perhaps is a complete perfectionist, who is really anxious, who, for example, this is something that one parent told me, won't put their hand up to go to the loo because they are terrified of being told off because this particular teacher happened to have a big, deep voice and they were terrified. Where they simply don't seem to be able to settle, where they are incredibly fussed by changes of routine. Again, an example that a parent told me, where the teacher decided, this is at primary school, that what she would do as a surprise for the children coming up to Christmas, she would turn their classroom into a winter wonderland. Absolutely brilliant. So of the 30 children who came back, 29 went, "Oh my goodness, miss, that's absolutely wonderful." And one had a complete meltdown because the classroom was simply not as he had expected to be. That was not the classroom he'd left, and it was shattering. So it's the children who are behaving differently from their peers and who are basically unhappy, anxious, not content with school, not making friendships, behaving in ways that are more than fleeting, which are long-term, where perhaps at school pickup you are being called aside to speak to the teacher more than everybody else. If you have a child, for example, who might have dyslexia, where it is obvious that, say, by year 2 or year 3, where you are no longer learning to read, but reading to learn, i.e. you're taking that knowledge and transferring it to other subjects, your child is still struggling with the basics of reading, then it might start to suggest that something different is going to be needed. And I'm really looking at it at a primary level going into senior school, because that's when you want to start thinking, do I need to do something different? Ideally, what you don't want to do is to get your child into a school in year 7 and discover then that it's completely the wrong environment. And I have to say that this is anecdotal, there's no research to support this, but we do have parents ringing us up, and it seems to be year 8. If you have a child in an environment that's not quite right and where things aren't working out, it's where things can fall apart because they're in this bigger canvas. Perhaps some of that scaffolding between year 6 and year 7 is taken away. They're having to move between different classrooms, different subjects, they're losing all their stuff. Life is just not working out for them, and that's when things start to go wrong. So ideally, if you can really, as far as possible, take an objective look and see how things are going and start planning at primary, junior, prep age level, it should help you to avoid problems in senior school.
Brilliant, thank you. Tanya, you must have highly academic students studying at your school as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I would completely agree, and I think Charlotte did really well at kind of listing it out. Academics is just one side of the coin, and what everything is about around special needs is it's unlocking that, harnessing that power that they have. Because for a number of children, it's not the cognitive ability that is the issue, it's the other barriers to learning that prevents them from accessing that cognitive ability. So absolutely, we have highly intelligent and highly academic students, but they were not able to thrive in mainstream because of the additional barriers to need, whether it's working memory, executive functioning, social communication and interaction is a huge one, processing speed, the amount of the energy that the children are having to just manage to get through their day, as opposed to being in a state where it is the norm, they're learning strategies, it's okay. You're not centered out if you're the child who is having challenges or needs a sensory break or just an opportunity to learn differently. It's all completely accepted to that point, and we hear of this all the time. The child who won't put their hand up to go to the toilet, they're not open to learning. They can't possibly learn. Then on top of that is, do they have the right assistive technologies, the right tools being given to them. So again, what's most important is what's in here. It's not the mechanics of handwriting that is the most important. We, of course, do teach handwriting and support students to do it. But for a number of students, the actual mechanics of handwriting means they never get to use that cognitive potential because all the focus is going into this. You then introduce the concept of, being able to work full-time on a laptop and being able to touch type, and for some students, something as simple as just being able to get things down and not worried about what it looks like and how many things are underlined. They get all their thoughts out and then can go back to it. And, I'm delighted because the world is changing. The world is opening its eyes to, the fantastic aspects of neurodiversity and how much neurodiverse people have to bring to the world. So many of the jobs that are out there these days are not looking for people who come and work in a conventional way. They're looking for people who can think outside the box and see the world differently. We have to support our students to get through a conventional education system so they can attain that. But it's not just about cognitive ability. It's about ensuring that your child is getting the support to those barriers so they can make the most of the cognitive ability. And I would agree with the year 8 component, what we have seen for a number of years, and again, anecdotal, just based on trends. We have more and more students coming to us in the prep school now at younger ages. And like I said, this is evidence-based and research-based. Early intervention is absolutely, gives your best outcomes. But also a number of parents, what's happening about age 8, 9, children develop at that age. The lovely, everybody gets along and we're all friends starts to break away as they, develop their sense of self. And what happens to the child who is neurodiverse, or can happen to the child that's neurodiverse, is they're really conscious of their difference to others. They struggle to understand why they can't be like that or why certain people might not be interested to them. Unfortunately, other children can be unkind at that point, and their self-esteem and sense of self and purpose just starts to plummet. And then on top of the special educational need, you also have this anxiety and issues with self-esteem. And I think because of a lot of the pressures of whether it's SATs or 11 plus, a lot of parents are moving their children prior to that if they can see this isn't the system that's working for them.
Okay, brilliant. So it sounds like the ages between 7 and 11 is where a lot of the behaviour starts to be evident that perhaps a diagnosis might be on the cards. Let's talk about EHCPs then, because there's 92% of students at your school have an EHCP. This day is all about 11 plus choices, 13 plus choices. I imagine that a lot of your children are in that 7 to 11 age category. What advice would you give to parents now who have a diagnosis or a potential diagnosis? Should they be getting an EHCP now? Should they be looking to get a plan?
I am always recommending that people get an education, health and care plan if your child has a diagnosed special educational need. It isn't about, and I know it can be challenging, it's not about they now have a stigma. They absolutely do not. That document is written for them. That document states where their challenges are, where their strengths are, and what provision must be provided to support them to thrive. And that document gets to stay with them until the age of 25 and ensures that their needs are met, adjustments are made. It doesn't always come with funding. I have students with education, health and care plans that are not funded by the local authority. It's not about that. It's about capturing what your child deserves to have and needs to thrive, and it needs to change with them. The process is long and very bureaucratic. So we would always recommend that parents are engaging as quickly as possible upon recognizing that there's special educational needs, because it is not an overnight process. There's mandatory time frames that local authorities should be doing, 20 weeks, I think, Charlotte, it should be the turnaround for a needs assessment. The reality is, on the ground right now, those deadlines are not being met because the demand is very high and the resourcing is low. So it's not an easy process. Your school should be helping with this process, and the Senkos within your schools, as well as any professionals that you have, professionals reports, ed psychs, clin psychs, specialist reports, or therapeutic reports add real strength to the EHCP process.
Can I just add one point to that, which is that education, health and care plans are a great idea. Again, speaking to parents, one question we often have when parents ring us up is that they say, OK, my child has an EHCP, so they're getting the support, but I'd like them to go to a mainstream independent school. Can you, how's that going to work out? The issue with the independent mainstream schools is that unlike state schools and indeed special schools, they don't have to take a child with an EHCP. They mustn't obviously break discrimination law, but they don't have that same compulsion, because in the EHCP, when you get to the draft point, you get to name a school. And state schools, great. Independent schools simply don't have to take children and will say that they cannot educate the other children efficiently. It's not going to work out. And that can be quite a shattering blow. That's not to say that you should absolutely agree with Tanya that you should apply for an EHCP. If your child needs more help, it is your right, you should do it. It does clarify, exactly as she said, the level of the support, and the more precisely quantified it is, the more likely your child is to get it and for things to work out. But it is something to bear in mind because of this way that independent schools work. So that's just worth saying.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. My final question before we move on to questions from the audience is anxiety in children is quite a widespread problem at the moment. The recent figures in terms of students' attendance at school is not yet back to pre-pandemic levels, certainly, and then for students with special educational needs, that percentage of children who are not attending school full-time is higher. What advice can you give to parents to try and get their child school ready so that child has more of a chance of staying in school and being supported through that to attend fully? Charlotte, do you want to kick off?
It's really hard, and my heart goes out to any parent who is having issues with this. It's not always easy because, again, local authorities can come down on like a ton of bricks via the school on families who are not sending their children to school. In theory, there should be a lot of working together. If a child quite obviously is distressed and there is a reason for that, then the school should be able to put measures in support that might involve some online teaching, because the problem is that if you compel a child who is anxious and where the school is the cause of that anxiety, it's simply going to make the problem worse. But for the sake of their attendance figures, the school is under a lot of pressure to get that child into school. So I think the first thing is to try and talk to your school, try and get the evidence, because evidence is it's really important in getting an EHCP. It's really, really important in getting a fair hearing, because ultimately your local authority can and will prosecute parents who decide that they are unable to send their children to school. So it's really about engaging, about getting the evidence, working with your school, working with your local authority, getting the documentation, finding out what the issue with your child, but not making the child feel that their non-attendance at school or their anxiety is something that they should be punished for. And it can be a real problem, because your child can end up feeling that they are contributing to the problem, that they are the problem, whereas in fact, of course, they're not. They are anxious. The other thing just to bear in mind, this is more of a general point to make, is that we are, as parents, so fixated on a particular timeline, GCSEs at 16, A-levels or whatever course at 18, that what we don't always understand is that if your child is out of school and they are anxious and they are helped and the situation is resolved, they can take GCSEs at other points. They don't have to take them at 16. The main thing always is that the child is feeling okay, that the child is being able to cope. Because as Tanya said, if you have an unhappy child, an anxious child, that is a huge barrier to learning. They are not going to get their GCSEs, or if they do, they're going to be intensely unhappy while they're doing it. So find the cause of the anxiety, resolve that, even if it means taking them out of school, once you've placated the school, the local authority and so on, and then work out a plan, which could be a return to school. It could be getting them through the absolute minimum number of GCSEs at some point and then sending them through to a further education college, which Tanya again mentioned. I'm a great fan of these because they are the antithesis of the high-powered independent schools, but they have wonderful pastoral care, wonderful well-being, and can be a really wonderful resource for people who found that conventional box-like system that works for so many children, but not all, can work for them if they decide to go that FE route. So there are solutions. It's just a question of not feeling overwhelmed and seeing the problem as, my child's not in school, I'm getting punished, how do I get that child back in school? But what is the issue with that child? How do we support that child? What do I do to straighten out that child's life and make things work for them? Not easy, but that, I think, is the way to look at it.
Brilliant, thank you. Tanya, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, couldn't agree anymore. And I think the two big points I'd like to pick up on there is very much about there is not a time scale for your child, and that is purposeful. We are purposely registered until the age of 19, recognizing that most of our students can reach those milestones. They're just going to do it at their pace. So we can have students in our schools sitting GCSEs at 18 and 19 and then going on from next steps to there. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And the outcomes of that for a number of children, neurotypical as well as neurodiverse, is outstanding. And I think post-COVID, we have to really think about the world a little bit differently now. And that this has had different impacts on different people. Anxiety can be debilitating. Non-school attendance is really challenging because not only are they missing out on the academics, but they're missing out on the socializing and forming those connections. And I think to Charlotte's point, dealing with the anxiety first is what needs to happen. What is the trigger? A lot of times your child will not be able to tell you what the specific trigger is, but working with the school, tracking patterns, taking a look at things, because there's things, if you're not tracking it day to day, you might not realize that actually it's the lesson after break time that is always making them super anxious because of an interaction that they have during break time. And if you can start to track that alongside your school, look for flexibility within the school too, having a different timetable. The child might just be coming in once or twice a week or possibly just a couple hours a day, but that, it's going to be different for every child, but it is about thinking outside the box, tackling the anxiety, and knowing that if that can be tackled and the trigger and the solution found, the academics will come.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're going to go to questions now.
Hi there. I have a question about...
I have a question about... so I guess the situation I'm in is I have a child who's actually loves primary school, very happy to go in, but is autistic, has had a diagnosis for a long time, doesn't need any specific supports now, but I'm just very aware, as you said, that like a lot of the high-pressured kind of senior schools aren't going to be the right place. So in a sense, I don't have an obvious reason to go to specialist, but I obviously I'm also very aware that not all mainstreams are going to work, and I'm trying to find something that is kind of flexible and supportive to kind of maximise the chances that a mainstream setting would work. And I'm just wondering what kind of questions should I be asking, or how do I go about finding that school that will be, supportive and kind of a bit flexible, so that if things do go wrong, and I know for autistic girls often it's secondary that's the challenge, and there's all the social stuff going on, the executive function, which is different from primary, how to sort of manage that, I guess.
And it's a great question, and I think to start with is always being 100% transparent. I think, many years ago, I would have a number of parents who would hold information back from when applying to the school, because not wanting to hurt the chances. If you are applying to a good school, a good mainstream school that can nurture your child, they should want all that information. We talk about it, warts and all. It's because because it's about, the adults understanding what a bad day can look like. Because if we can understand that, we can understand whether we have the right support networks in place to be able to support your child. So one, I think it is very much about needing to see the schools and speaking to the right people. Yes, you'll speak to the registrars, but you're also wanting to speak to the SENCO. You're wanting to speak to a senior member of staff, and you're wanting to understand what supports they have in place for autism. Your child's going to be different from another autistic child. How does that display for your child? What do good things look like? What do challenges look like? Are they needing some support to regulate? Are they, as happens a lot with girls on the spectrum, are they a child who is masking all day and then coming home to you absolutely exhausted and wiped out? Where are the certain areas your child is struggling with? And what does the school do to support that? Do they have other children with additional needs? You would expect the answer to be yes, absolutely. How do they support them? What happens if my child can't follow the regular timetable? There's a certain lesson that they just absolutely can't do. Languages often comes up a lot with specific learning difficulties. Are they flexible within their timetable to recognize? How are they providing therapeutic support? Because this is quite important. And will be very specific for each child. In a non-specialist environment, a lot of the support is withdrawal from lessons. So how do they decide what lessons withdrawal happens from? And then most importantly, how do they ensure whatever's happening with, say, that speech and language therapist or occupational therapist behind closed doors, how is that then delivered by the rest of the staff? And how does your child get the opportunity to generalize those skills? I think those would probably be my main ones. You will get a feel, you will, and there are some phenomenal mainstream schools out there with exceptional SEN support, absolutely. But you want to hear it from the horse's mouth. You don't want to read it in a prospectus. And what a lot of schools will often do is be able to put you in contact with other parents to hear about the experience of the school from other parents with students with additional needs.
I think the other thing I'd add to that is that when you go and visit the school, I think you'll very quickly get an idea as to how they're going to react. And if they blank you or just sort of shut down, and I've heard this from so many parents, then I think you can be pretty sure that it's not going to be the right school for you. If they sound as though they would be privileged to take your child, which of course they would be, then that is brilliant. That's a very, very good start. And it's going to come down from the top. If you have a supportive head, more than likely you will have a supportive senior leadership team and a SENCO who is allowed to have a bit of clout and do those trainings. I visited a school the other day and they'd actually put in the staff loos these notices saying to staff, would you like to find out how an HCP works? I thought it was just so good. It's those little touches that make all the difference.
And I think just the last thing I'd say about mainstream as well, and it tends to be more mainstream state than independent, but the other model that you will see with a number of mainstream schools is that they have a specialist unit attached to it, normally a resource provision, and that works really well for some students. It's very much about, is this the right school for my students? So a resource unit is a lot of times those students with additional needs, that is their home base. A lot of their learning will happen within there, but a minimum of 50% of their learning has to happen within the mainstream class with support. And again, for some students, that's a remarkable environment because they get the small environment and then support in the big. For other students, that transition is just too big between the small environment and the big, and it's not supportive. So I think just recognizing the different systems that are out there too.
Thank you. I would like some input, please. I have got 9-year-old twins. One is dyslexic, but not enough that she wants any extra time in exams. One has suspected ADHD after an initial consultation, but I've now paid for the psychiatric evaluation to get the paperwork that proves that he has ADHD, so we don't know what level of ADHD. I'm thinking of having them sit the 10+, but I'm not quite sure, even for the 10+ or for the 11+, how much information do I give the mainstream independent schools that I'm looking to get them into? Do I tell them all of this? Do I not mention it? They supposedly need an end of year 4 exam or letter from the school. Do I ask my school to tell them in the blurb, by the way, they've got ADHD and dyslexia? Do these mainstream schools need to consider that in my application? Should I be tiptoeing around the point, or do I just boldly go in? I don't know how to deal with it.
It's as Tanya said, you have to be upfront. Quite apart from anything else, if you're not, and they discover that you've withheld information and they make your children an offer, they can withdraw the offer of a place. So it is definitely in your interest to be upfront. And I think the other point to make is it goes back to the fact that the school needs to be not just prepared to support your children, but willing and really keen to support them, because they want that whole child with everything they bring to the school. And if they're not, and you feel you're having to tiptoe around the subject, as you said, it probably isn't the right school. So
now,
absolutely
am I correct
be open.
in thinking that all these schools supposedly offer, they all say, oh, and we have an excellent SEN department. So if they do, then are they supporting those pupils who have got in and now they found out that they have them, so they're going to help them? Or are they embracing, do we know, is it obviously on a school-by-school, case-by-case basis, are they embracing these children whose parents come and say, these are the issues, how will you deal with them? Because they all claim to have these departments, but I just don't know to what level they're actually supporting the children.
It's easy to sound cynical. I'm not going to sound cynical. But they have to have all their paperwork and all their policies in tip-top shape, so when the inspectorate comes around, it all reads absolutely wonderfully. And there are some schools where it's just policies. I mean, it sounds awful, but the policies are great. If you read a lot of school websites, as I do, we all do at the Good Schools Guide, you'll find that there's a remarkable amount of similarity. I'm not going to say cut and paste, but sometimes you find a school where they don't just have the policy, they live the policy and they go beyond it.
Right.
And I think visiting the school and talking to them and really seeing how they talk about SEN, how genuine they are, how wholehearted they are, what that department actually does, how much support it actually delivers. If a child needs speech and language support, how is that provided? Will there be a personalised timetable that allows them to have that? What actually happens? Is it more than just words? And I think by asking those questions, not in a competitive way, but in a genuine desire to know, you'll find out a lot about those schools, because there is, wonderful though it would be if both your children got into these fabulous schools, there's going to be no point if they ultimately feel that they've failed or that they can't be supported. So better to find out now, however challenging and tough that is, than to find out later.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question related to that? So if a parent is attending an open day, how would they get access to the SEN code to ask the right person the right questions that someone like this lady needs to ask?
Sorry, Tanya.
You start, Charlotte. I've got a view too.
At some school open days, the head of learning support and the SENCO will be there. So when you're ringing up, I would speak to the registrar. I would say, is the head of learning support or the SENCO going to be there? I'd really like to have a chat with them. If they're not, then arrange to talk to them separately.
And I think I would just go one step further of, it would, this is a generalization, but it would be a little bit of a warning sign to me if you attended an open day and there was literally no mention of what they do to support students with additional needs. They might not tell you how to talk to the SENCO, but if that's not a part of their presentation, you're probably not at the right school if you have a child with additional needs.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Realistically speaking, how many independent schools which are selective also want to take your child if they are SEN? Realistically, just...
How many?
Yeah, I mean, in average, both my children are independent schools and both got in before we knew anything, and so they're still primary. The feeling I got is they're both very good schools. I have the feeling that they do their best, also because there's a legal requirement there. But I don't have the feeling, I've never heard we're privileged to have your child because they're neurodiverse and they're bringing something different. Both my children are very intelligent and very able, but they bring, of course, they require a different way of thinking and some. And I've never seen, I would love to see an independent school which considered themselves a great selective school also, say what you said. It would be privileged to have your child. So my question is, does it really exist?
I would say it does, yes, absolutely. So, and again, this is a bit of, we are slightly talking
Yes.
generalisations. It is very, if you talk to the really highly academic, very selective schools, I guarantee that all of them will say that they would have, and it is a generalisation, and forgive me, very, very bright, very able pupils who are probably, whether diagnosed or not, will have high-functioning autism, who very possibly live for a particular subject and are flying in that subject, and will then very possibly, and I have met a few of these children, go on to study maths, science, very typically, not inevitably, but quite often at some rarefied level. And I did hear a story which I really liked of this, I think it was a Cambridge tutor, and his pupils all arrived from these schools, and he made them all read fiction. So they could see how other people actually lived and how they thought. So they could get a sense of that before retreating again into this rarefied world of maths, I think it was. But yes, it just depends to the degree of support. I mean, there is a logistical side to this. Schools, mainstream independent schools, only have limited resources. They are not special schools. So there is obviously a limit to what they can realistically provide. And quite apart from anything else, going back to Tanya's point about children feeling conscious about being different, you don't want to have the only child in the class who is having tangibly different support from everybody else if that child is becoming an adolescent with everything that goes with that. So there is also that to think about. Is that child actually going to be happy based on the level of support they need? So I think there are a number of different factors to take into account.
Just a comment on that. If you're looking at the state sector, you can see data on the percentage of students at that school with an EHC plan. You can also see the data on the percentage of students at that school who are receiving SEN support. So that will vary hugely from school to school. So it's worth looking at that. For independent schools, they're not obliged to publish that information, but you can access it. You can ask for it, and that might help. And then if you further want to break that down, you could go one step further and ask the SENCO or ask the school, how many students have you admitted in the last 3 years who have come with SEN support needs? If you are confident enough to ask those questions, you will get the answers, and the way that they answer the question will give you a view as to how they're going to approach your application, your child's application.
Do they have an obligation to answer that question?
Do they have an obligation to answer that question?
Well, one thing I would say is that we do review schools, and if you go to our stand, you'll find that what we have in all our reviews is quite a detailed paragraph on what they actually support. And we do talk to the learning support team. We do ask them in more detail. So it might be worth, if there are any particular schools that you're interested in, you're welcome to come to our stand and see what we say about SEN and the support that's provided.
When we go in, whether it's a mainstream school, whether it's a special school, if we need that information, if we want it, which we do as part of our review process, they will give it to us. So why they wouldn't give it to a parent is beyond me.
I don't know, they wouldn't give me the information.
They haven't yet.
So that's why I was wondering. Thank you.
They should.
Yes, please. My question is pretty technical. I wonder what documents or what proof you have to give to the school after you applied, and or let's say when your kid pass ICB or a pre-test. And you think you're eligible for extra time. Let's say you have a visual aids specialist report saying that your kid is eligible for extra time, but you do not have the formal health and educational plan, let's say, supported by governmental authorities. So what is the legal rationale behind getting this time? How would you address the school? At your current school, at the ICB level, you probably have talked it through, but at the pre-tests for the senior schools, let's say.
So is this support?
So you're talking about kind of access arrangements, am I correct? The additional support.
Some additional access arrangements and some extra time.
Yeah,
which your kid may be eligible for.
Right. So I can only talk because we don't deal with 11 plus and 13 plus. Obviously at the formalized exam stage, so at key stage 4 for GCSEs and any qualifications, there's a process the school will go through to assess the child for access arrangements, and it has to be done by a specialist member of staff. Some schools outsource that, or parents are required to get that, and there's very specific requirements during that assessment in order for a child then to be given, 25% extra time or laptop use or a scribe, whatever the case may be. So it's a very formalized process, starts in year 9 and then stays with them. A lot of schools will do, and we do this, we screen our students for access arrangements. We look for their normal way of working and when it gets to that formalized time, that's when it will become official, but we ensure they're kind of working like that right from the beginning, so they're getting used to using that time. I'm afraid I'm not very familiar on how it works for 11 plus and 13 plus.
That's pretty much it. I mean, again, Tanya has mentioned normal way of working, and that's quite a key thing, because what you don't want to get is a child just having something special for a particular exam. It's sensible to be able to demonstrate that they need this pretty much consistently. But if you can show that, and it comes down to evidence, then you should be able to get that at whatever type of the exam you're doing. And again, if the school is being difficult about it, I would question whether that would be the right school.
Brilliant, thank you. I think there's no more time for questions, sadly. However, if you do have questions, then please come and say hi to us. Our stand is right here, the Good Schools Guide stand. We have Charlotte and also Sophie, who is a special educational needs consultant who can answer any questions. So thank you so much to Tanya and to Charlotte, and thank you for listening.